This is
Make It Plain.
Make It Plain. M.I.P.
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson. Make It Plain. Get woke.
It's the most wonderful time of the week again with Markos Moulitsas, founder of the largest online progressive community, DailyKos, founder of Civiqs with a Q, the largest and most successful polling firm, and the host of the still rather new podcast, The Brief, downloaded wherever you get your podcast. It is very, very popular as well. In fact, the most popular podcast in the world. Markos Moulitsas joins us.
We're still batting 333. Not bad for baseball.
It's good to see you, man. So the infrastructure bill, let's start there. What does that mean going forward? What are you thinking in terms of the Senate and what's going to take place? And what does it do for Democrats politically?
I mean, I'll start with that second half. Right now, we're seeing legitimately Joe Biden's popularity is going down. The Republican strategy has been to delay and to obstruct and to slow things down. So Biden got stuff accomplished early in his presidency and people loved it, right? He was popular. The longer things drag out without any new progress, the more his numbers are falling. And Civiqs tracks daily. You can even go to civiqs.com, Civiqs with a Q, and you can see that Biden's numbers, particularly among independents. Democrats are pretty solid. There's been a little bit of loss of support, but they're pretty solid. Republicans always hated them, and that won't change. So it's all in the independents, and independents are becoming increasingly disenchanted with the Biden presidency, and its numbers are thus coming down. That is a problem because we have an election next year, which will be in large part a referendum on Joe Biden. So yes, any Democrat, what do Democrats need to do? And of course, the answer is always you got to show results. So you have a narrow congressional majority. Both chambers are very narrowly Democratic. In the Senate, we don't even have a functional majority. We have a de facto majority, right? But with Sinema and Joe Manchin, everything is difficult. And what we have then is we need to pass this. We're talking about $4.5 trillion that would radically transform the American economy, make it more equitable, shift the burden from the poor to the rich. I mean, there's so much good in these two pieces of legislation, both the stupid bipartisan infrastructure bill, but the more even substantive, I forget what they're calling it right now, but the $3.5 trillion spending bill. So it has to pass. It has to pass. And that way, Democrats have something tangible to point to as they run for re-election next year. Now, unfortunately, we have Joe Manchin, and even more unfortunately, we have Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona. And Manchin, we talk about it every week. I get Manchin. It's a 30, 40-point Trump state. We shouldn't have a Democratic senator from West Virginia. We're lucky that we have as much as we have. And I got to say that for the most part, he's played ball. He's been an a-hole about the whole process, but he has actually voted for things when necessary. Sinema, though, has no excuse. She has no excuse. Her state is turning, Biden won the state. It's trending blue in a very dramatic fashion, and she's acting like this is Barry Goldwater's Arizona from 40 years ago, and it's clearly not anymore. Now, Sinema's talking about, I won't vote for the $3.5 trillion in spending. And even Manchin's made some obnoxious noises about that, but they won't tell you why. That's the problem, right? For them, it's beating up on the liberals. That's too much. And so I hope Democrats challenge her and him to point out exactly what in those spending bills they want to pull out. Because it's not about substantive differences in I think that's a waste of money, or I don't think that's a priority we should be spending money on. It literally, they think that by going from a $3.5 trillion spending bill to some arbitrarily smaller number, that there's some voter somewhere that's going to reward them for being an obstructionist a-hole. And that person does not exist. So this is going to be the challenge moving forward. The good thing is Biden has a lot invested in this. And we've talked about it before. I think it's helpful that Biden's an old white guy. Because if it was President Warren, Manchin would be having a ball. Being an obstructionist a-hole. I think it's harder for him to do so with Joe Biden. And so what that prognosis is, who knows? But I think we're at a point, and I think progressives in Congress are playing it very, very smartly by tying the bipartisan bill with the $3.5 trillion spending bill, because it's all or nothing. It's basically everybody gets something that they want or nobody gets anything that they want. And let's see if Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are really going to tank all, including the bipartisan spending bill, if they're going to tank everything because of their little irrational, and it truly is irrational. There's no polling that shows that it's a smart position. There's no interest group that's pushing for a reduced spending bill. I mean, there's Republicans, but they're pushing for zero. They're pushing for, what are they going to push for? Tax cuts for billionaires. That's what they're going to push for. There's no constituency pulling for what Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are doing. So let's see if they really are willing to tank everything and thus the Democratic majorities next year. Because, Mark, we've talked about it. I mean, we talked about the polling. Sinema's not looking good right now. She's not going to get reelected in her current trajectory. So she needs to radically transform her behavior and start playing ball, or she's gone. She doesn't survive a primary. She doesn't survive a general election right now.
Yeah. It used to be that a president could leverage infrastructure, leverage jobs and building projects with elected officials to get something done. Why does that not work in this era?
Because Republicans made a big deal out of eliminating the whole pork process. Remember pork? Pork was all about buying votes. It's saying, you give me your vote, I'm going to give you $3 million for this bridge in your district. Now, you don't vote for me, you don't get that $3 million. So there was a lot of horse trading. By eliminating pork in the House, you basically took away that leverage, and the House became what has become now, which is an ideological chamber as opposed to a practical one focused on trying to deliver for people. Now, I think Pelosi has sort of changed that. People are getting projects in their districts, because even Republicans have gotten stuff and they try to claim credit for it, even though they vote for the underlying legislation, but they're trying to get away from that. And I think the idea of eliminating pork might have seemed like a good idea at the time, but I think in retrospect, it's very clear that all it has done is made the House more ideologically guided, as opposed to a chamber that is actually looking to benefit its constituents. Because if you're going to vote for the guy who's going to, rail against black people, or you're going to vote for the guy who is a nice guy, and neither of them can deliver anything specific for your district, then it's easier for these white conservatives to vote for the racist white guy than for the practical, good government, functional human being. Now you change that, you allow for pork, and then it becomes a much more difficult, I think, dilemma. Do you vote for the ideologue, or do you vote for the guy who's going to actually bring money and jobs to your district? That then becomes a much different equation. But that's not where we're at right now.
More MIP after this message. So, as you said, it boils down to Manchin and Sinema, and we'll see who they really are, whether they're going to just hold up everything for the sake of what. I still don't know why they really do what they do, especially Sinema, because as you said, Arizona has changed. Rem Barber is back to West Virginia this week before we all gather at the Lincoln Memorial this Saturday. Still staying on Manchin, still, hitting him in his home state, which is very, very important. And as you alluded to, also as a part of this process, there were some conservatives, so to speak. Joan McCarty refers to them as a sabotage squad. So Rem Barber and I met with Nancy Pelosi yesterday morning, and she talked about some in her caucus who weren't really with her at first, and how it was helpful for those of us who've been involved in the street actions. Folks, those things help. They complement what happens on the inside-outside strategy. And she said it was close because some of those people weren't going along. But some of those conservatives were under the influence of Manchin and Sinema. They were encouraged, were they not, by Manchin and Sinema to be somewhat obstructionist, weren't they?
Yeah, explicitly. They explicitly applauded their, that obstructionism. The thing that is different now is that once upon a time that would have sort of paralyzed the Democratic Party, and all the discussion would have been about how will progressives get nothing, or will they get something by ceding to the demands of this sort of middle. That has changed. both Pelosi and Biden leaned very heavily on these. I think it was 10 Democrats who were creating trouble. And here's the thing: is that the Progressive Caucus, they played it very smartly. They basically said, "You guys are the ones that are electorally endangered, so you're the ones that get nothing." They didn't have to say it, but those progressives, most of them, if not all of them, represent very safe Democratic districts, so they have nothing to fear. Their specific jobs, they have nothing to fear. It is those 10 sort of moderates, which are all in very competitive, difficult districts. They're the ones that need to deliver something to their constituents to be able to win re-election. And so the progressives sort of flipped the script and said, you get nothing. And what's really frustrating, Mark, about these 10 progressives and Manchin and Sinema, is again, this is not a practical complaint about the spending bills. They're not looking at it and saying this clause, and this clause. I don't think that's the best use of taxpayer money. That's not what's going on here. They're basically looking at what liberals want, which is X amount of money, and they're looking at what Republicans want, which is zero or negative, more tax cuts for the rich. And then they split the baby, right? They're so moderate because they're right in the middle. But that's not based on any good policy. It's not based on good politics. It's not based on practicality. There is nothing more beyond it, more than empty rhetoric about being in the middle. And they think that they can then go back to the district and say, yeah, we're not like AOC, and we're not like those Tea Party Republicans or QAnon Republicans. We're like in the middle, so we're not scary. and it's frustrating because it's empty. There's nothing there.
Yeah, we're not scary, and we have nothing to give you either. We haven't produced.
That's the other piece. If you poll and people, and I think it was Data for Progress, which is a very, very good pollster. They polled those districts, and the spending is very popular because spending money on infrastructure and jobs and things like the child tax credit, making that permanent, those things are popular no matter where you pull them. You can pull Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, and that stuff is popular. And so these people, they're not saying they're not looking. I wish, you talk about politicians who, put their finger up in the wind to see which way the winds are blowing. I wish they did that, because if they did that, they would know this is popular. This is the reason Joe Biden is pushing it so hard. He understands if this was not popular, Joe Biden would not be pushing it.
Yeah.
So he is pushing it. The party's pushing it. This is not the old Democratic Party that used to frustrate us, Mark. This is a new Democratic Party that gets it, except for a handful of people. And the problem we have now is that those handful of people are the margin of victory. And so to solve that problem, it's not about changing the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is already there for the most part, obviously around the edges, but for the most part, Democratic Party is already there. What we need to do is we need to build on majorities, which is going to be tough because it's a midterm election, first-term president. History is against us. The Republicans are working so hard to suppress the vote. And we have gerrymandering coming up ahead of us, right? So there's all these factors that are going to stand in the way of us expanding. Oh, and then there's the Senate, which, of course, as rural areas empty out, it means that those leftovers in places like the Dakotas and Nebraska are going to have even more influence, even though the states are losing population. So West Virginia literally lost population. So we have all these institutional disadvantages facing us. We have to overcome them. And it's not fair, and it sucks, and it's not right, and it's not democratic. And yet that's the reality of our situation. And if we were to somehow able to pull through, we can motivate our people to turn out and vote. If we build those majorities, and we're not even talking a lot, right? We need 2-3 seats in the Senate. We can do it. It's incredibly hard. I'm not going to say it's likely, but it's possible.
Right. Yeah.
If we can survive redistricting and voter suppression to grow our majority in the House, then things that we've been talking about, like DC statehood, maybe Puerto Rico statehood, a real voting rights bill, banning partisan gerrymandering, all those things can then happen. And it becomes a much different political situation overnight. We can even pack the Supreme Court, pack that sucker. just expand it.
Right.
Expand it, change the composition. There's so much we can do to reshape American politics, but it really all comes down to an election in an off year when historically the party in power loses seats. And we as Democrats have a hard time getting our base vote to turn out, period. And especially so in the midterm election. So there's so much opportunity, Mark, but there's so many challenges. And Republicans know this, which is why they're working so hard to obstruct, to delay, to suppress,
right,
and to make it to frustrate liberals so that they don't want to turn out next year the way they did not turn out in 2010. And Sinema and Manchin are playing along with them. And I will never understand why they think that's a good choice. Good course of action.
More MIP after this message. Not a lot of time left, but Afghanistan, there's been a shift, obviously. At one point, people were almost unanimously in favor of a pullout. Now that's flipped. I honestly, Markos, blame the Beltway and the corporate media for that. The way they have portrayed it, because there were different ways to portray this. No one has never before in history have that many people been airlifted in such a brief period of time. That's an objective fact. But instead, it's being presented as just a crisis and something that Biden is at fault for doing, and it's just bedlam. But I mean, it's like thousands of people, and they're not finished.
25,000 yesterday alone. We're talking about 75,000 since the airlift began. And the first few days, were chaotic because nobody expected the Taliban to just sweep in with zero opposition. So there's a lot of criticize about not starting this earlier and about a lot of red tape preventing some of the stuff. We should have been processing this months ago. And, we at DailyKos were arguing about that months ago. So this is not Monday morning quarterbacking. Like, we knew that we needed to get those people out. Everybody knew the Taliban was going to take over. They just expected to take a couple months. That said, once the operation was organized, and it took a couple days because you don't plan overnight, but once that was organized, it is an incredible logistical feat. And I'm in awe of the numbers that they're moving right now. I mean, 25,000 yesterday alone it just blows your mind.
Yeah.
And CNN, there's a reporter who's like, the Biden administration says they want 50,000 out by the end of the month, and there's no way they can do that. They're at 75,000 now, and there's still 6 days left in the month. As we tape this, and so it's a little bit infuriating to see that kind of coverage. And there's no they're not saying like, "Oops, we screwed up." Like, this is pretty impressive. No, they're not going to say that. Everybody's going to Monday morning quarterback. But the fact that the Taliban took the country as quickly as it did, I think really justifies Biden's decision to get out, because we were not helping create a democratic Afghanistan. We were propping up a puppet regime with insufficient public support, clearly. And it is awful what's happening. And I feel for every woman and girl that's going to have to suffer through Taliban government. But we were spending, I think we were spending about $200 million a day. These are the same people that say that we don't have money to do things like forgive student debt, and we don't have money to take care of people. But $200 million a day in Afghanistan was sort of, and so I know you're talking about some polls that people are a little horrified right now, but Morning Consult, which is a pretty decent pollster, polling for the New York Times, asked the most loaded question possible. They said, do you still support pulling out of Afghanistan if it means that ISIS and Al-Qaeda, blah, blah, blah. It was basically, if we pull out, the world's going to explode and die. Do you still support it? And there was still majority support for pulling out. It was something like 45 to pull out and 40% to not pull out, with the most loaded possible question. I think the reality is, if you ask the question, just like I said, do you pulling out or spending $200 million to prop up a puppet regime with insufficient public support, I don't think the numbers would be there. And quite frankly, I think this is politically, it's not going to be an issue. It's a human rights catastrophe. I don't think anybody is going to deny that. But the U.S. can't police every human rights catastrophe around the world. We can't be the world's policemen. And this is just another reminder that every time we try to do nation building, doesn't really turn out so well.
Yeah, I agree. Folks, check out The Brief every week. Also download it wherever you get your podcasts. Check out Civiqs with the Q. And as always, be sure to check in with DailyKos.com if you are not already signed up for alerts, if you're not already a citizen there in the largest online progressive community. Markos Moulitsas is always our guest. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you so much. Everybody, please be safe. The Delta variant is serious. We're not over this yet. See you guys next week.
This Saturday at the Lincoln Memorial, folks, for the first time, probably in any major protest demonstration, and definitely at the Lincoln, we will be giving free vaccines. So if you come to the Make Good Trouble rally with us Saturday and you're not vaccinated, we're going to do an altar call, and you can get vaccinated there on the spot. All right, folks, so just keep that in mind. Marco's right, this Delta is not playing. We also all are still praying for Reverend and Mrs. Jackson, as well as they are battling COVID in the hospital right now, and all those who are struggling. So we keep everyone in our prayers. Thanks, Markos.
Thank you.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.